Le Pen, once a political outsider, now breathing down the neck of the establishment, challenging patriarchy in politics. Her popularity rising as austerity and joblessness batter Europe. In multiculturalism's graveyard, where social unrest is rife, could she lead the way? Will she have the strength to save a sinking ship? To return France to simple pleasures? From conflicts and colonialism, culture shock and Brussels bankruptcy, we talk to the leading woman in French politics.
A European Parliament committee almost unanimously voted to lift your immunity because of alleged racist statements you made 3 years ago. Why now, and why is the Parliament so united in this question?
The truth is that censorship reigns in France, and we are hunted down in all circumstances because we express an opinion that is different from the one-way track of thinking developed by the European Union and also by the Socialist Party and the right-wing parties in France. I've been hunted down for saying I think it's not normal that prayers should be allowed to take place right in the middle of the street, blocking traffic. It was a territorial occupation that is unacceptable. It's the law, and yet I'm being hunted down for having said this. It's not a big deal. It's a source of pride for me to be hunted down by the system.
Do you feel less secure because of that?
No, I don't feel any less safe, but still it shows that although France spends a lot of time preaching freedom to the entire world, it should probably deal with its own issues first.
Does it mean that your attempt to fight the EU system from within, as you've said you were doing, has failed?
No, I don't think so. I think next year's European elections are going to be a huge upheaval because patriotic parties like my own are growing in popularity in all countries across Europe. All peoples are starting to reject the European Union, which is a deeply undemocratic system that has failed, and I think the majority in the European Parliament can change next year. And it's true that it will be a change in direction, which I think will be a good thing.
So your own popularity continues to grow. I mean, I grew up in Paris, and I remember when I was a child, the National Front was really a marginal party that didn't have much support, and now it really has become the thing, France's third biggest party. Why do you think you've become so popular now?
The third, maybe even the second. Maybe even when the European elections come around, the number one party. I think we're really moving towards taking power. And that's what I want, you know. I'm not here as a bystander. I'm here to come into power and apply the ideas that are mine and that I can see are already being applied in other countries around the world. I think it's just a matter of it all coming together. A lot of French people are starting to realize that everything the National Front predicted came true on the subject of the risks with immigration, on the economic model that has been imported from and imposed by the United States, meaning the ultra-liberal model, which destroys economies and denies the people the riches that they themselves have created, and denies nations their sovereignty. There you are. And so consequently, with each passing day, realizing that the National Front's predictions were correct, more and more French people are taking an interest in the solutions and adhering to the solutions we offer.
Well, having said that, your opponents say, oh, Marine Le Pen is popular now because of the European Union's problems, not because she's actually contributed to anything positive, any positive change in France.
Yes, of course, but that's not true, and they know that, because in the partial legislative election we've just had, the National Front came second. So we're not just a protest party against the establishment anymore. We're a real party of people who vote for the National Front so that we apply our ideas, so that we win elections, not just to show discontent or despair as our political opponents would have it.
Are you going to run for president in the next election?
Yes, well, I mean, if first of all, if the National Front Party members trust me enough to invest in me as a presidential candidate.
Oh, for sure.
And I think that we're going to take power. I think we'll make it in the next 10 years tops, which means that might be in 2017 or it might be the next time. But the system thought up by the Union for a Popular Movement and the Socialist Party, the established system, is clearly collapsing. And I spend my whole life working on what happens the next day, by which I mean on rebuilding a system that is respectful of democracy, respectful of justice, respectful of sovereignty, which all means the freedom of the people.
Well, Hollande likes to say that things are going a bit better than under Sarkozy because things back then were so bad that he can only make a bit of a progress.
No, the reality is that things are getting worse and worse, and these two movements managed to turn one of the world's richest countries, France, into a bankrupt country with a rocketing unemployment rate, with poverty that continues to rise, and a real feeling of despair, with a culture that is collapsing. It's important to talk about this. In life, it's not just the material aspect. There's also a feeling of belonging to a people, a desire to defend one's culture and identity, an identity that is so respected across the world, everywhere, except by the French elite.
L'identité et la culture française, sauf par les élites françaises.
Alors vous dites que la France fera beaucoup mieux sans le...
So you say France would be much better off without the European Union. I saw the latest survey, and it's true that 60% of French people think that EU is heading in the wrong direction. But only 34% will vote for France's exit from the EU. What do you read in these figures?
Pour la sortie de la France.
Well, first you need to understand that there is no debate in France. Defending the European Union and the euro, the single currency that was imposed on us, almost feels like defending a religion. It means there's no exchange of arguments, and to be against the euro is a sort of blasphemy. I'm asking for a referendum. Because surveys are great, but I remember when we were asked our thoughts on the European Constitution, and the surveys said that a vast majority of the French people were for this Constitution, and actually 55% voted against it. So we need to organize a debate. We need a referendum, and to ask the French what they think about throwing open the borders with Schengen, about this currency that destroyed our economy, about European directives taking precedence over our own Constitution, which is a manifestation of the sovereign people. These are real questions that have not yet been asked in France, and I'm convinced that if they had been asked, the French would make the decision to take back their freedom.
Well, imagine you're the president, you have the referendum, and it turns out that most French people want to stay in the European Union. Would you change your policy on exiting the European Union?
In those conditions, I would try to negotiate. You know, I am infinitely respectful of the desires of the people. I think the only sovereign here is the people. Consequently, if I hold a referendum and the people don't follow me, then of course I'll submit to the people's decision. But I would try to defend France's interests within the EU, because today France's interests are not being looked after. We submit to the demands of Germany, a country that defends its own interests. We can't begrudge them that, but our interests and theirs are contradictory.
Les nôtres et les leurs sont contradictoires.
Would you still like France to leave Schengen?
Oui, bien sûr.
Yes, of course. Of course. I think the number one right for a country is the right to decide who can enter and remain on your territory. And yet today we have no borders. We are subject to absolutely massive levels of immigration, which is utterly destructive, including the national cohesion and our ability to live side by side. The immigration that comes from Africa, from North Africa, it's been going on for quite a long time. But now it's, how can I put it, accompanied by a new type of mass immigration, which is immigration by the Roma coming from Eastern Europe. We now need to be reasonable and get our borders back.
So you mean police borders and checkpoints like before?
Like before, yes. Yes, I think freedom for a people comes from control over its borders. Not just in terms of human traffic, by the way, but also in terms of capital flow and also products. We're not a hotel full of open doors where everybody can come in and do whatever he likes, sell whatever he likes. There you go. I think preserving and protecting France's interests begins with control. That doesn't mean we close the borders. It means we control the borders. We open them if we want to open them, and we close them if we want to close them. And in that way, we can protect the economy and the well-being of our country.
So I was thinking, even if the European community or the EU ceased to exist, globalization is something much bigger and deeper and wider than us. It's an irreversible process. So isn't it like going against the flow of things with this whole border thing?
No, I don't agree. Globalization is a fact, but nobody ever said it was something we couldn't monitor. All the countries in the world, apart from the EU, defend themselves against globalization. They try to keep it in check. They control it. They put quotas on imports. They put customs duties on things to defend their products in the economic sectors that are essential to their independence. We're the only ones who don't do it. And so consequently, it's not about denying that globalization is happening. It's about getting France into a position where it can defend itself against globalization and to set some playing rules. There's not a single game in the world that doesn't have rules. And today, globalization in the EU is completely deregulated. And yet, we see the consequences are catastrophic. Well, this is my principle. I want to radically change the immigration policy in France. I want to suppress the jus soli. I believe that nationality should be inherited or deserved, so we don't automatically become French just like that. First, that comes first. Second, I would implement a small immigration deterrent, because France grants a series of social aids that are detrimental to its own citizens. It means that today there are even illegal immigrants who benefit from larger social aid that some French citizens can obtain. All of this draws people in. So if we get rid of what I call the immigration magnets, and then in a logical and humane way tell people, you're here legally, there's no problem. You belong here in France. On the contrary, if you've been unemployed for 6 months, it's because there's no work for you, and therefore we're forced to ask you to return to your own country. So honestly, that's, on the whole, if you will, a sensible, reasonable plan that is already used in several countries around the world, except here in France, where for ideological reasons, if you will, we have subjected ourselves to massive immigration for over 30 years. Of course, you know the consequences of that.
I understand that you would not let more in, but what would you do with the immigrants that are already in France? Put them on the planes?
But if they're here legally and they have a job, then there's no problem. Well, there's no issue in particular. However, if they're unemployed, we'll just tell them, look here, we can no longer meet your needs. There are no job prospects here for you. And we have implemented the national priority policy. The national priority policy is meant to give priority to French nationals of the same skill to access positions and obtain housing in France. This is what I call a small deterrent. From the moment immigrants have no further interest in coming to France, then they'll stop coming.
See, immigration is also a huge issue in Russia. We talk about it all the time when we say we have to have more restrictions. But then here's the question. Who would work in places at very low salaries that Russians would never want to work at? Same thing in France, no?
Yes, I understand perfectly, because it's a measure that we've been using since the 1970s. But that was imposed by big companies. The real question is, why is there no one willing to work in these places? Is it because they're underpaid, and given the difficulty of these jobs, their salary should be higher than those that are given today? It's mostly due to the decline of the West, where intellectuals have been encouraged more than laborers, and working with your hands is seen as something that's degrading. I don't believe that. I think that manual labor should be valued once again, because we need a balance between manual and intellectual work. And I'm convinced that if we hadn't given in to the demands of these large companies, which always seek to keep lowering salaries, then there would have been Russians in Russia and French people in France willing to accept jobs known to be harder, but for which the salary is more than enough to compensate.
Is immigration for you more of a cultural or economic issue?
Both. Both, because the bulk, the importance of immigration, its brutal quality, it's all at the core of the history of immigration, that it's brought to France 10 million immigrants in 30 years. Now, remember, we have a population of 65 million, which is considerable. However, we have no jobs for them. So these people that arrive can't work since there is none. And this happens because they're people, they're not products. So they come with their culture, their religion, their traditions and customs, and instead of telling them, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, meaning when in France, live like the French, our government, one after another, has told them, stay just as you are. It's your right. It's your human right, instead of imposing our culture onto them. So there's a shock, and at some point a conflict, because the French want to preserve their way of life and don't want to adopt the cultures, traditions, and customs of these foreigners.
I know there's a serious economic crisis in France at the moment. You've often said that austerity measures have only worsened things. But wasn't France's economy drowning even before these measures were put into place? And doesn't France have 100% of French debt to pay anyway?
C'est que les mesures d'austérité.
Non, mais moi ce que je dis, c'est que les remèdes.
No, but what I'm saying is that the austerity measures are a remedy that actually kills the patient.
C'est aussi simple que ça. Donc le malade était malade. Mais on est en train
there you go. It's like that. The patient is sick, and we're about to give him a fatal remedy, or in a way, bleed him. But it's a major error, because all the measures we take now are meant to raise taxes and lower earnings. All of this slows down the economy. More taxes constrict the economy, and so there is less development, less public revenue for the state, higher deficits and higher debts. And so we come full circle with more taxes. This is a vicious cycle that will end by effectively ruining the French economy.
Qui va finir par effectivement avoir la peau de l'économie française.
But the austerity measures is not the only thing annoying the French. Hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets to protest against a law passed by the parliament allowing same-sex marriages and the adoption of children by homosexual couples. But the law is now passed, it has come into force, and the protests are over. Is that it?
Well, no, it hasn't completely calmed down. Now the French nation must vote better people into office, people who have taken a vow to review that law on gay marriage and adoption. Or, in the case of the UMP, we can see all the cynicism of the French right. They've protested and made big speeches. But when the law was voted on, they didn't do much to change it. I think that if it's the will of the people, then we should go back over that law, and that's something that I have promised to do.
So if you're elected president, you would change that law?
Of course I would go back on that authorization.
Well, it seems also to be the trend here in Russia. The Russian parliament is passing a law not only forbidding gay couples from adopting children, but also a law against gay propaganda, whatever that means, because I'm not sure. How are you going to defend both the traditional values and the rights of the gay people?
Well, listen, we're going in the right direction. This means that intimacy should remain intimate. A person's sexual life and choice belong in this sphere of intimacy. However, the fact that these should be the subject of a propaganda campaign makes no sense. I mean, it pertains to intimacy, individuals, and what happens in their homes. People are free to do what they want morally, as long as it doesn't contradict the law. But to publicize it in schools, as is the case in France, gender theory comes straight from the United States, as many questionable things do in any case. Today, the main teacher syndicate in France insists that we teach children of 6 a book called Dad Wears a Dress. But honestly, we can see parents asking themselves, what is this absurdity? So let's review everything that pertains to the freedom of morals, sexuality, and therefore in private life. It's none of the public's concern. Seen like that? It's simple, right? And in this way, everybody can live happily.
Et avec cela, chacun pourra être heureux et vivre heureux.
Could a gay man who is discreet about his sexuality be part of your cabinet?
Mais c'est le cas.
That is the case. I have homosexuals all around me, and it poses no problem for me. But they don't make a show of their sexuality or any propaganda, and they don't try to convince anyone, because they're aware, and legitimately so, that all this pertains to a person's private and intimate life, and not to political life.
De la vie intime et pas de la vie politique.
There's a lot of discussion about international intervention into local conflicts. You expressed support for Mali intervention, while saying that Libya has been a catastrophe, and now we may be looking in some sort of intervention in Syria. How do you judge which intervention in which country is justified or not?
Comment on décide quelle intervention est justifiée et quelle ne l'est pas?
Well, the situation is very straightforward. In Mali, first of all, there's been cooperation between France and Mali for many years now. And it's the legitimate government in Mali that asked us to intervene. Faced with the rise in power of Islamist terrorist groups that were aggressive and even assassinating people there. Consequently, in those conditions, we find ourselves in a situation that we know from before, where a friendly country asks you to come and help because it's the subject of aggression. Right, so we went to help. What is incoherent in the behavior of French leaders is that they fight the Islamists in Mali, but support them in Libya and in Syria. That's what's completely incoherent. I'm completely coherent. I consider the danger of Islamic fundamentalists absolutely terrifying. And I think that yet again we have totalitarianism in the 21st century. There was communism and Nazism in the 20th century, and now there's Islamism and globalism. That's the totalitarianism of religion on one hand and of trade on the other. And so I fight it, but I fight it everywhere. In Mali, in Libya, in Syria.
And now Hollande and Cameron are presenting a united front against the EU's desire to stop arms getting to the rebels in Syria. Is that a step towards intervention, and what would the consequences be for France?
No,
I don't think it's a step towards intervention, for a simple reason, actually. French leaders did such a bad job that I don't even think the French army has the capacity to intervene alone, particularly in Libya, especially since they've just intervened alone in Mali in conditions that were already technically difficult. And France only intervened in Libya because the U.S. gave support in the form of infrastructure, which is a shame, by the way, and we need to change that. And so I don't think that there will be an intervention, but I still think that French leaders are under the influence of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, who are pulling the strings far behind the scenes and who are providing weapons and assisting Islamic fundamentalists across the world. And we must denounce that, which is what I'm trying to do in my own country.